Hello everyone, my name is Sydney Aiken and this is my Evidence-Based Programs and Practices presentation. For the first section, I did Chapter 3, Self-Attributes and Identity. Racial identity is mainly based on the perception of shared racial history. Racial identity defined by Helms is a sense of group or collective identity based on one's perception that he or she shares a common racial heritage with a particular racial group. Racial identity can be described as a psychological attachment to social categories that designate which racial group an individual is a member of. Discussed are two models of racial identity. One being the Negrescence model, which is one of the earliest models of racial identity, and the multidimensional model of racial identity. Best practices for increasing positive racial and ethnic identity and racial socialization. Culturally relevant programs and activities that seek to improve racial socialization provide a space for African American youth to talk about their social issues in their lives with trusting adults and peers. The rite of passage programs are used to promote positive identity and encourage youth to develop attitudes and behaviors necessary for productive citizenship. These rite of passage programs are usually modeled after the ones in Africa and are usually done during a weekend or overnight retreat with parental permission and are taken to a natural environment away from their homes and/or everyday life. This program has also provided structure in the lives of both male and female youth. For Section 2, I did Chapter 7, Neighborhoods and Communities. The definition of neighborhoods vary and can depend on different academic disciplines. Defined by Chaskin in the textbook, neighborhoods are social units, spatial units, and networks of relationships, associations, and patterns of use. The term communalism is important within the African American communities. Through communalism, African Americans have a more socially embedded and connected sense of self. African Americans are more likely to define neighborhoods based on social relationships than location. There are factors in African American communities, such as poverty, environmental health risks, and so on, that can keep African American children from getting things like a good education and healthy relationships with their parents. Empirically supported practices and policy for community and neighborhood involvement. There are three main strategies used by African Americans to promote community change, and they are political and social action. This focuses changing social policy through protests, media, and political effort. Resource and capacity development. This is where people in the community work to build local resource access and capacity. And then there's cultural empowerment. This is where they are emphasizing or raising cultural education and consciousness. For Section 3, I did Chapter 11, Lifespan and Development. Developmental psychology is the study of physical, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral changes in humans at the beginning of conception and through death. The life expectancy for African American males born in 2015 was 72.2 years, and for an African American female born in 2015, it was 78.5 years, and both age expectancies were lower than those of white males and females born in that same year. Best practices for developmental outcomes. There are interventions to prenatal health and birth outcomes. A study was done and found that interventions and support groups during pregnancy and seeking help with postpartum depression was helpful for African American women. Based on research, researchers recommend that development of culturally relevant programs to encourage breastfeeding among African American women. There are interventions to improve child and adolescent outcomes. Researchers, policymakers, and youth advocates have found three focal developmental outcomes: ability to financially support and care for oneself and family, ability to develop and sustain healthy relationships, and ability to contribute to one's community. Lastly is intervention for seniors. Researchers have found that seniors participating in a multi-purpose facility will help with physical benefits, great social connectedness, and reduce loneliness. For Section 4, I did Chapter 12, Health, Illness, and Disability. Supported practices for reducing morbidity and mortality. One supported practice for reducing morbidity and mortality is system-level changes. Universal health care, which is done at a national level, is one suggested change to reducing health disparities among African Americans. Change at a community level would also be important if there were to be sidewalks and trails implemented, better recreational facilities and grocery stores with healthy and affordable food options. A second supported practice is preventing HIV. HIV prevention efforts put in place by psychologists have generally targeted behavioral change at an individual level, but risk reduction efforts targeted the individual level are limited because they are costly with facilitator training and program implementation. A third supported practice is reducing diabetes. Researchers have found that behavioral change techniques have proven to be helpful for decreasing diabetes risk. The Diabetes Prevention Program, or DPP, was largely funded by the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases. Application. In order to apply this to Black children or youth, I would create a program just like the YMCA or Boys and Girls Club for ages 10 to 13, where we would meet up at a park or a recreation center once or twice a week and do extracurricular activities. We would have time set aside where we sit down and do their homework first. That way it can be done when their parents pick them up. Then as a group, we all do an exercise or play a sport together. That way, they can all learn how to properly socialize with each other and get exercise at the same time. We would also take time out of every other week to discuss the serious health risks that they may face at their age or more possibly when they are older, such as diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, sickle cell anemia, and so on. My program would be a nonprofit program, and we will only take donations given by certain sponsors. The name of the program will be Get Smart About Health, or GSAH. Questions. Do you believe it would be possible to ever get universal health care in the United States? Why or why not? Is it more beneficial for Black children or youth to have culturally relevant programs, or do you think the programs that they get into should be diverse? As a child, did you have a sense of racial identity? Why do you think you did or didn't have a sense of racial identity?